Okay, welcome back.
This is Roadmap to Retirement. Tune in for financial tips, investment strategies, and smart money moves to supercharge your retirement savings. Alex Neri, CFP, and guests are here to help you build your roadmap to retirement.
What I'd like to talk today is distribution planning. Before we get to distribution planning, I will address the obvious for those of you that are watching the video rather than just listening to the audio. I do have a really cool mustache right now. The beard is gone. You are looking at the mustache version of Alex. And we're doing it for Movember. A lot of you will know what Movember is, but it's the words November and mustache combined into Movember. And the idea is we're raising money for men's health issues. So if you would like to get involved in that or donate or anything else, feel free to reach out. Other than that, we'll move on to a normal episode of our podcast. In addition, we also don't have a guest today. It is just me. So get excited and buckle up and we'll dive into it. So distribution planning, we get a lot of questions around this. And I want to first paint the picture of why we're even talking about distribution planning. And I think it's a lot of people who are maybe younger or earlier in their career, you're taught to save money. You don't really have the vision of what that money will ultimately mean. You're just saving money in your 401k, your Roth IRA, your brokerage account, whatever it is. But at some point, the goal of that money is to spend it. And when you do that, you're taking distributions, of course. But let's start to tie some meaning to that. So the first place I want to start is with something called the 4% rule, which a lot of our listeners have heard of. And if you Google this, it's nothing revolutionary. It's nothing new. It's certainly not anything I came up with. But the 4% rule states that if you spend, in theory, 4% of your portfolio each year, you can sustain your income for about 30 years in retirement. So first rumor I want to get rid of here is that your money will last forever. I think a lot of people think of this as living off the interest and never spending that principal. That's not the reality. The studies show that you will dwindle the principal, and therefore the 4% rule should, in theory, last about 30 years. So what that means for somebody that's younger and still working, if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and you're still working for a while, is start to think of the money that you have set aside in those retirement plans as not the lump sum, but what 4% represents. So if you have $1 million saved, think of that now as $40,000 a year of annual income. And think by doing that, it attaches more meaning to it. And it allows you to set a goal for your retirement. If you decide, I want to retire and live on $80,000 a year. Now you know that about $2 million should produce $80,000 a year. On top of that, we might also have a pension, and we certainly hope to have Social Security. So there's more to it than just that, but I think as a rule of thumb, it's a good place to start. And as we look forward and turning I know some of our listeners are younger, but towards the people that are getting closer to retirement, attaching meaning to that money and starting to contend with the psychological switch that is taking that money that you've saved forever, that you've always been taught to save and not touch, and then turning around and deciding that we do need to start to spend that money, and that's why we saved it all of these years. So allowing yourself to get over that psychological hurdle and begin to spend money is something that we see people really struggle with. Now, in the same vein as distribution planning, we should also talk about how money is invested. So a lot of people get that statement in the mail, or maybe they used to get in the mail and now it's a paper statement, or now it's an electronic statement rather. And you look at that, there's that pie chart on it. And if you can, see me hold my hands up here, this weird circular graph, and they're telling you that a certain portion of that is stocks, bonds, different kinds of mutual funds. It might even break down more detail into emerging markets or large cap, small cap, whatever it is. That's not what's important. What's important is we recognize the amount of risk we're taking in that portfolio. So in really surface level terms, we can assume that the stock portion of our portfolio is higher risk, and then the bonds or the cash accounts are going to be lower risk. So we're coached throughout our entire life that as you get closer to retirement or as you get older, you want to start to become more conservative in nature. So you start to see that pie chart that maybe at one time was 100% stocks. Now you're 60 years old, and it might show you that you're 60-40 or even more conservative than that. But rather than looking at the default setting that your target date fund or your 401k people set you up with, let's start to assign some of those dollars to when and how you're going to spend them. So what I mean by that is what we'd really like to do in distribution planning is break up our portfolio into different time segmented buckets of money. And this is, again, nothing revolutionary, nothing that I invented. And if you Google the bucket concept, you'll come up with this. But we want to have a short, medium, and long-term bucket, ideally. Some people might just have a short and a long-term bucket, and that's okay. We'll talk about the difference. But your short-term bucket should be funded with anything that you're going to spend in the next, we'll call it 5 years. So right off the bat, if you're somebody that's not even retiring for 5 years, you really shouldn't have much or anything in that short-term bucket. you should be talking about the mid and long-term bucket. Reiterating, short-term bucket, let's say it's anything in the next 5 years. Mid-term bucket, maybe that's 6 to 10 years. And then your long-term bucket is anything that you're not going to touch for at least 10 years. And the reason I bring this up with distribution planning is when we look at that pie chart that's grown over the years on the front of your statement, and it says that you're 60-40, meaning 60% stocks, 40% bonds, are you truly, based on the dollar amount in your portfolio, going to spend 40% of your portfolio in the next 5 years? I would generally hope not. If you're somebody that's done a good job saving, you really shouldn't need to do that. So let's start to back into those percentages as a number that you'll actually spend in that allotted time frame. So let's say that you're hypothetically somebody that's got $1 million set aside for retirement. You are retiring today. Today's your last day of work. Congratulations, you made it. You're retiring today, so you want to have 5 years of funding in that short-term bucket. And then for simplicity, let's just say the rest of it we're not going to touch for longer. That's our long-term bucket. If you spend, we'll use really easy numbers, but if you spend $50,000 a year, you should have $250,000 in your short-term bucket, right? 50,000 times 5 years is $250,000. Now we can subtract out of that any money you have coming from somewhere else. So if you're taking Social Security and that's $20,000 a year, or if you've got a part-time job, you're going to continue and that's $30,000 a year. You can do whatever the numbers are for yourself, but in theory, we should be able to recognize that even if we're spending $50,000 a year, maybe we only need $30,000 a year. And if that's the case, now our short-term bucket is only $150,000 rather than $200,000. I'm throwing some numbers out there, and sometimes people are visual learners and they need to see it. But generally speaking, hopefully that makes some sense. So our short-term bucket, if it's funded for that 5-year period of time, now it allows us to have that be very safe, very conservative. We know nothing's going to go on with that money. And it allows our medium and long-term buckets to then be a little bit more aggressive. For example, your long-term bucket, if you know you're not going to touch it for at least 10 years, you can probably be pretty much all in the stock market. And when you have things happen like 2008, COVID, whatever the next crisis is, and that your portfolio is down 20, 30, even 40%, although it's not going to feel good to see it, you can kind of mentally tuck that away as your long-term bucket and hopefully not experience the same anxiety you would if that was money you're using right away. In the example I've laid out, which is not real for anybody, but we said hypothetically we need $250,000 as a short-term bucket, and then we've got the rest of our $1 million portfolio of $750,000 that we can be more aggressive with. So if you think about it in that landscape or through that lens, now when you look at that original pie chart we're talking about, you got 25% in bonds and 75% in stocks, which is probably a lot more aggressive than some retirees would be. That's certainly not what you're taught to do if you follow the conventional wisdom of just getting more conservative as you get closer to retirement. Today I'm retiring, so most of the time I'm going to be in, at the most aggressive, maybe a 60-40 portfolio. But we run into clients all the time who are getting ready to retire and they're in a target date fund, or they've set up things a certain way from advice from a neighbor or friend. And maybe they've got 30% stocks and 70% bonds, and they're probably about the opposite of what they really need. And if you run any kind of retirement projection on this, yeah, I can't give specific advice without a specific person, but you're going to have a much more likelihood of success if you're willing to take on an appropriate amount of risk. If you're not growing that money that you're not going to touch for 30 years, it's not going to grow and you're not going to have money in 30 years. So if your intention is to have a long, healthy retirement, we need to invest accordingly. So that's one part of distribution planning. The next question that we get all the time is, hey, Alex, what if I have a lump sum need? Meaning we built this financial plan, and we're planning on spending our $50,000 a year. We've set up our portfolio appropriately to do that. What happens if I get 5 years into retirement and for a good reason or a bad reason, I need extra money? And instead of having $50,000 this year, I need $100,000 or $200,000. What's the best way to do that? And the most common example I can give of this is the retiree that's decided they want to move or relocate. Maybe they're just downsizing and they need a lump sum of cash to buy this new house. And they've always been taught their conventional wisdom, just like getting more conservative as you get closer to retirement. The other conventional wisdom is if you're retired, you don't want to have a mortgage, or you don't want to retire if you still have a mortgage, so get that paid off. And although that advice is coming from a good place, I'm going to dispute it a little bit and say it's not really correct. When people began saying that, if you think about maybe a generation ago, if you were talking about buying a house in the 1980s, and you're going to do so at 15 or 17% interest, it's a totally different environment than a retiree today buying a house. And maybe if they take a mortgage, they're at 6 or 7% interest. And you got to weigh all the options, but is it worth paying an interest rate to the mortgage company to not have to disturb your investments, not have the opportunity cost of potential appreciation on investments, and mainly not have to pay taxes on that distribution? So if you were to pull out an extra $100,000 from your 401k or IRA, you're creating a tax headache for yourself, and you're going to probably owe Uncle Sam a lot more money than you would have if you took gradual distributions to pay off your house over even a 5-year period. If you're buying a house for $300,000, you can gradually pull out $50,000 a year for 6 years. That's probably going to look a lot more favorable than just taking one lump sum distribution. And that's before you get into estate tax or the IRMA tables, which we talk a lot about. So that's Medicare payments based on your income. So we want to make sure that we're weighing all that in. But that's a huge question we get. And really the best thing you can do to have flexibility is have tax diversity. And I talk about this a lot, and I get some pushback from people that say, we didn't have a crystal ball. We didn't know tax rates were going to be this, or we didn't know the Roth IRA has been available since 1998. But if you're a retiree who had the Roth IRA that's well funded, and you have that pre-tax account, and you have your after-tax taxable account like a brokerage account, all those things allow you to have different buckets of money to pull money out of when you need it in distribution planning, which is extremely important. So if you're a younger person listening to this, my piece of advice is save money into different things that have different tax treatment. I think every young investor should have a Roth IRA. I think having an after-tax brokerage account makes a ton of sense for most people. So if you're young, do yourself a favor and set those up. If you're older and it's too late for you, I might argue it's never too late, but if it is too late, look at other options to start to build that after-tax pool. That can be done through taking distributions from your IRA, hopefully in a lower tax bracket, and putting it into the bank account or a brokerage account. You can do my favorite thing, which is the Roth conversion. For those of you that don't know about Roth conversions, it's taking money out of a pre-tax IRA, converting a portion of it into a Roth IRA. By doing that, you are paying taxes in this tax year. But the idea is that by the time you need to take a lump sum or you need more money, you have an after-tax pool of money to pull from that you can take money out of tax-free. So those are all extremely important. A couple other topics having to do with distribution planning that I want to hit on. And we started this by talking about the 4% rule, which is important and it's a good guideline, but it's not perfect. Very few people have this linear progression in retirement where they're simply spending 4% of their portfolio every year and then they die one day. Not to be morbid, but that's the reality. Most people have a little bit of volatility in their spending habits, right? Nobody spends the same every day, every month, every year. And we do see a pattern in retirement, meaning that we have these 3 phases of retirement. You might hear referred to as the retirement smile, meaning that you start off early in retirement, spending a lot of money because you're out traveling, doing things, having fun with friends. And then you get to the middle part of retirement where you're spending less money, not necessarily because you want to, but because you're slowing down. You don't have the same enthusiasm for going out and traveling and doing all those things. And you're spending time home with family, doing things that cost less money. And then the later stage of retirement, the other end of that smile, that curve, is when healthcare starts to get more expensive. The reality for most people is you will have some kind of long-term care event. It will be expensive and you'll spend more money at the end of retirement on things that you really don't want to spend money on, but you don't have a choice. So it makes this kind of smile pattern where we start high, we go down, and we go back up at the end and higher expenses again. Because of that, the 4% rule is of course not true. How can we have a 4% steady distribution in retirement if our expenses are constantly changing? And the answer is you can't. So although there's merit to the 4% rule, and it should give you a guideline for how well funded you are, we want to take a step back from that and appreciate that it might be okay to spend more money in the early years of retirement, doing things that you enjoy doing, having the retirement that you deserve, that you worked hard for, so that little bit later on in retirement, you recognize you're going to have to spend a little bit less money. And then later on in retirement, you spend money when you have to. So it might end up being that you're spending 6 or 7 or even 8% early in retirement, with the understanding that when you get to a certain age or a certain point, rather than spending 4%, maybe you're spending 1 or 2% and you're spending much less. Point being that not every year has to be the same. And that I think one of the big obstacles with distribution planning is the guilty feeling of spending money that you spent 40 years accumulating. And I'm here to tell you it's okay to spend your money, that you should enjoy it. This is money you worked hard for. You should, again, have the retirement that you deserve, which sounds super cheesy, but the reality is that your goal is not to die a millionaire. Your goal is to have fulfillment in retirement, spend time with friends or family, and attach meaning to it, which segues into my next topic, and that is attaching meaning to your money. If you are somebody who's retired or getting close to retirement, or even very early on and you're looking for motivation to save more, Stop thinking about your money as just a number on a piece of paper. Stop thinking about however many commas are there, however many zeros are trailing, and start to look at it as something meaningful. This is money that you can use to take that trip you've always wanted to take. This is money that you can use to support a loved one that you care about. We find a lot of retirees are going that route. They have money saved, they live comfortably themselves, and they're finding more joy in supporting their adult children or grandchildren, doing something they want to do. And we see a lot of grandparents gifting money to minors. We see a lot of retirees trying to support their children, and that gives them more meaning. So now it's more than just dollars on paper that mean nothing, and it's allowing them to see people they care about enjoy some of their money while they're still around to see it. You would rather your adult children enjoy money so that you can be part of it than wait until your funeral to start to enjoy it. So if you're in that position where you've done a great job saving for retirement, I would consider attaching meaning to it. Same thing is true for people that are much younger. So if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and you're saving money for retirement, instead of just thinking about it as a accumulation, you're taking money up and you're putting money away, attach that meaning by starting to think about what you want to do with it. Maybe it's something that helps you accomplish your dreams, which again sounds cheesy, but if you have a retirement dream, think about that money supporting that. If you've got kids that are going to go to college, you're setting aside money for that. You think about that savings as meaningful because it's helping somebody you care about. Hopefully you care about your children, right? So attaching meaning is wildly important. I think that everyone needs to understand that. So that's my 2 cents on attaching meaning. From there, I think we've covered a lot of what I'd want to talk about with distribution planning. I could go on for hours about this stuff, but I think the important themes are, if you're early, starting the retirement planning journey, make sure you're setting yourself up to have money in the appropriate places. Of course, saving more money always helps. I think understanding how much you can reasonably spend, so that 4% rule gives you a good ballpark to attach meaning to how much spending power you're going to have. And then also let's talk about, what does the money actually mean to you? So that's my 2 cents on this. I didn't want to drag this out too long today, but thank you for listening, and we'll talk soon.
Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Alexander Neri. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Alexander Neri or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. Alexander Neri and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.